Please welcome Mike Hewitt.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct honor of introducing, I got to pause for a minute and just tell you about this fella. Before he had a stellar career at the RNC, he had a career that most folks would be jealous over. While at the RNC, he served as communications director and then chief strategist, and then he went on to be the 30th press secretary for the Trump White House and thereafter communications director. It truly is my pleasure to introduce Sean Spicer.
Thank you very much. It's awesome to be here. My first time on the island, and wow, even in a couple hours, it's pretty impressive. You guys got something special here. Chairman Ron Weiser does an amazing job of putting this together, and I'm honored to be here, but you're not here to hear me yet. We've got 6 really top-notch political operatives that I'll bring out one at a time. First, John Yob, no stranger to folks in Michigan. He's the principal of Strategic National with an impressive record of winning primary elections and conventions. He has consulted for and won campaigns for every statewide and many federal offices in Michigan. He is a Libra that likes, oh no, that part's not in there. John Yob.
John.
Jason Rowe is the principal of Rowe Strategic and has worked as a political and communications strategist. He's nationally recognized for his work in campaigns, clothing, fashion, and government advising candidates for president, Congress, governor, state and local officials, as well as corporations and political parties. Jason Rowe. Steve Mitchell is the CEO of Mitchell Research and Communications. He has worked in more than 40 states since 1985. Political clients have included governors, senators, members of Congress, state legislatures, mayors, judges, school officials, class presidents. No, that's not on there.
That was it.
Townships. Steve Mitchell, folks. Tori Sachs is the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund, an organization dedicated to advancing conservative ideas, holding our government accountable to taxpayers, and protecting freedom, opportunity, and workers' constitutional rights. She is a political strategist and public relations expert with more than a dozen years of expertise in state government and Republican politics. She is a nationally recognized policy analyst, watchdog, and campaign manager. Tori Sachs. Good to see you.
Thanks, John.
John Billings has nearly 2 decades of experience on Capitol Hill. During that time, he has served as chief of staff for 3 members of Congress and worked for leading trade associations in the food, retail, and pharmaceutical industry. Currently, he serves as the executive director of the National Republican Congressional Committee, and after previously working at the committee, running the incumbent retention division, which successfully helped get every incumbent reelected for the first time since 1994. In his role, Billings guarantees that we will take back the House of Representatives. Oh, wait, anyway, John Billings, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, Chip Englander is a political consultant and pollster who has advised campaigns for president, governor, United States Senate, and Congress for over 20 years. His campaigns have won the Washington Post Campaign of the Year and Politico's biggest surprise of the cycle. Ladies and gentlemen, Chip Englander. All right. I want to start off by just kind of painting a picture for folks and asking what a candidate should be doing. To say that this administration has not done well is the understatement of the day. So if you're advising a candidate right now who's running for federal office, they're running for Congress, how much should they spend of their time going after Democrats, reminding them of their policy failures versus presenting a positive agenda? John?
Well, I would say you should start from a TV perspective by getting your biography out there, but from a day-to-day knife fight perspective, you know, with Biden at 39% or so approval ratings, I would say to the extent that you can get media from it, whether it's even just social media, but earned media, social media, digital ads, TV ads, I would strongly recommend it.
John, what do you think from a congressional committee standpoint? These first-term candidates come in, they talk to you and your team, and they say, what should I be focused on? Because I want to run for Congress to do all these 10 things, right? So should it be a referendum or a choice?
I think it's really now 3 main issues. It's our economy. It's rising prices, smaller paychecks, and the Democrats wanting to raise your taxes. It's about safety and security and what they're doing with defund the police, and it's about securing the border. Those three issues, the Democrats are failing on, Biden's failing on, and if we continue to talk about those, we're going to have a really good success.
Tori, in Michigan, we've seen mask mandates that started off at the beginning of the COVID crisis. And Governor Whitmer was pretty much at the tip of the spear in terms of locking down economies and taking away people's choice and rights. It seems like she's not as adamant as she once was at the beginning of this crisis. Do you think that's because she just is reading the polls, or because she's kind of come to see the science?
Political science and the polling data, right? I mean, look, everybody in this room knows that Governor Whitmer has been guided by political science, polling data this entire time. You know, the types of things that she shut down. I don't know if you know this, Sean, but she outlawed boats. Like, you couldn't go on your own fishing boat in your own lake, right? And then a week later, her husband was trying to get her own boat up north, in the water. So I don't know why it was safe for her husband a week after everyone else, but people have had enough of it. People have seen it, and I think they're tired of it.
Jason, back to you, same question. But if you're advising a candidate, do you say, hey, look, Democrats are down, keep kicking? Or, hey, we got to go out there and put together a positive plan, and you campaign on what you'll do?
Well, when you're running against the party in power, it's a referendum on the party in power. And I don't think any of us in our wild imaginations would have foreseen Biden lurch to the left so dramatically, particularly what he said he was going to be during the campaign. So I really do think the egregious failures, whether it's Afghanistan, the southern border, COVID, I mean, there's so many targets for us to go after, and all of them display, I think, incompetence. And I think here in Michigan, that's one of the things that we can point to, whether it is Whitmer, Nessel, or Benson, is the incompetence of their leadership. And so even if people don't necessarily love Republicans, we are a much better alternative to what they've been able to see at the state and federal level over the last couple of years.
Steve, I think that there's no question that the Republican base is fired up, right? They were going to the last election, and the question becomes, though, can you win with just a base, or do you need to expand that and continue to reach out?
Well, obviously, you have to continue to reach out to people, and that's the beauty of the issues that he was just referring to. These are issues that are polling very, very poorly for Democrats. The independents are really strong on the Republican side on these issues of law enforcement, on the issues related to inflation. You take a look at the right track, wrong track in Michigan right now. It's 38%, 24% among independents. So we have a real opportunity on the issues that he mentioned earlier in winning over these independents, and they're critical. We can't do it with just Republicans. We can do it with independents, and these are the type of issues that are going to move the needle for Republicans.
Chip, you think about the issues that are at the forefront of people's mind. COVID, defund the police, the economy, inflation. I mean, even the botched withdrawal in Afghanistan may not affect everyone's life, but it's clearly at the top of a lot of people's mind. If you had to tell a candidate right now, you need to pick 3 issues to focus on, what would they be?
I think it's really all part of a broader piece, which is sort of the wokeism and the leftist lurch. It's not, I don't think it's about picking the single issue. This isn't, no car tax or flat tax, or it's this is a pump the brakes election, which is the overreach on all of these things is just outrageous. It's, teaching our military to be woke instead of warriors, and then you get Afghanistan. It's the critical race theory in our classrooms. They're pushing just this total, redo of this country, and it's just expressing itself on all these different fronts.
John, you mentioned TV a moment ago when you were coming out. Okay, so I'm a candidate running for office. How much of my budget now, in this day and age with social media, should I allocate to TV?
That's a good question. In my view, the number's been dropping by roughly 10% or 5% a cycle for the last 5 cycles. But I would say that TV should probably still be in that 50% range, with digital as a largely growing number. What I would point out in the previous question, too, is how interesting public safety is as a polling issue these days. Maybe not so much in a federal campaign when you're thinking about Afghanistan and some federal issues in Biden, but really here in Michigan, one of the most interesting things to me in polling so far has been that public safety is the #1 issue, whereas usually it's like number 6 or 7.
Tori, I will defer to the Michigan folks on the panel, but from an outsider standpoint, when I look at Michigan, from a party standpoint, I look at Detroit, Lansing and to some degree, I guess, Grand Rapids and say, okay, that's where the Democrats' power base is. Everything else is Republican, right? Which kind of mirrors what a lot of the country faces congressionally. You've got a packed, rural type district and an urban district. So if you're a Republican running for Congress, how important is it to, and not just Congress, but that's the best example, to reach out to minority voters as a Republican?
I think it's really important. I think that our party has really focused on that a long time. I think it started with John James when he ran 4 years ago for the U.S. Senate. I think you're continuing to see it now with the former police chief of Detroit running for office. So I think no matter what office you're running for, I think you have to reach out to people who might be more likely to vote Republican this time because their schools have been shut down, right? In places like Detroit, Lansing, Kalamazoo, their schools were shut down the longest. Those parents are seeing the impacts of what happened to their children. And I think that's a really on-the-ground issue, especially for moms and dads with young children who've seen what's happened as a result.
Jason, more than ever, the Republican Party actually in the last cycle has really had some minority stars step up. I mean, you mentioned Chief James here in Michigan. You think Larry Elder was basically the standard bearer out in California. You think of Tim Scott in South Carolina. I mean, Michelle Steele. Between Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and African Americans, we continue to actually build out not just people getting elected, but then they become the stars. I just don't think that message gets out. I mean, I don't think the Republican Party has gotten the credit for, and I think it's really happened more in the last 4 years than ever before, where you're now seeing these folks not just run for office, but get elected and then become the rising stars. What does the party need to do to maybe highlight this branding change or sea change that's occurred?
I think we used to be a lot better at it, to be honest.
We were better.
Yeah,
I think.
and take Byron Donalds in Florida, for instance. I didn't realize until March that he was even elected. I didn't see or hear anything about him becoming a member of Congress.
But you're not watching Spicer and Company at Newsmax. Every night at 6 o'clock, which is also available at youtube.com. That's for the speech later, folks. I didn't mean that.
So I do think our national committees need to do, I think, a better job of highlighting the successes that we're having there. And I think my minority targeting and candidate development is a two-pronged thing, too. It's not just increasing our vote share in those communities, which I think we've done. I think Donald Trump was very instrumental in increasing our vote share in the Black community and the Latino community and some others. But I also think it signals to non-Republican white voters that we're not the racists that we're portrayed as in the national media. When they see us not only going after Black and Latino and API votes, but electing those people and nominating them as our standard bearers, it's difficult to argue that we're a bunch of racists if these are the face of our party.
John, I'll get back to you in a second, but John Billings, I did my first congressional races in 1992. The last class that came into Congress was probably the most impressive class of freshman members of Congress that I've ever seen. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Beth Van Dyne, Nicole Malliotakis. I mean, the list goes on and on of just, when you look at that class, you go, there's a speaker, a majority leader, this is the, potentially a president. I mean, these folks are impressive up and down. How do you keep that going? Because the NRCC, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't really get involved in primaries. In a way, obviously you guys provided them support once they won their primaries, but how do we keep that momentum going to do what Jason's talking about?
Well, we'll always say we're always neutral in primaries. We'll never pick a side. But Chairman Emmer made a commitment last cycle that continues into this cycle where it begins with recruiting and finding candidates that represent what their Main Street looks like, not DC trying to pick out the perfect thing. And I think what we were really proud of, last cycle when we flipped 15 seats, every seat we flipped was either a woman, a minority, a veteran, or a combination of those three. So, yes. I think that's how we continue to grow in these communities, because we're talking about the issues that are important to them. Our growth with Hispanics, it's about the American dream. They're seeing the American dream being taken away from them, seeing people not incentivized to work that the Democrats are pushing. They're on our side with the issues. We just have to find people that represent them too.
So
I'm sorry, and I'll go back to you, John.
So we did last cycle Maria Elvira Salazar, who got elected to Congress in Miami, Hispanic, 70% Hispanic district. Thank you. Not a
Former
problem.
Univision.
70% Hispanic district, a district that Hillary Clinton had won by 20 points. They thought it was totally unwinnable, and we won that seat, and we did it because of the socialist overreach and sort of the woke politics is such a turn on. It's a turn on for white academia, all that, but for Hispanics, African Americans, middle class, it is a turn off. And what we're going to see is we're seeing these better margins, and that it used to be Republicans would run into trouble as, are we the socially intolerant party? Now it's the Democrats who are intolerant of other people's views and lifestyles, and it's creating a backlash.
John, you wanted to jump in?
The most interesting thing from my perspective on sort of the minority aspect of these fantastic candidates we have is really the grassroots enthusiasm for them. These candidates raise a lot of money online, are able to fund campaigns. John James proved it in the Senate race. Yeah. It's going fantastic for Chief Craig right now. He's got 10,000 donors already. And so the grassroots enthusiasm really gives these candidates a strong chance on the map.
Steve?
Yeah, I want to follow up on something that John said about the law and order issue. There's no doubt in my mind, looking at the polling in state house races and state senate races in Michigan, that the defund the police movement was a tremendous part of why Republicans retained control of the House. In the suburbs where we were having a lot of difficulties, that issue was very important. On 9/14, when I saw Chief Craig announcing his campaign and I saw the demonstrations, I tweeted out immediately, that could not be better news for James Craig, because it demonstrated this juxtaposition of a police chief who is all about law and order, discussing law and order, and then being shouted down by a crowd, showed exactly what lawlessness is all about and what law and order is all about. So I think that was a tremendous opportunity, and I think that played out very well for Chief Craig. And I just want to make one other comment. The issue of Afghanistan is the only issue I have ever seen where Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper both spoke against Joe Biden. That moved Democrats and independents.
Yeah.
And one thing I would do with every issue that comes out when they make a mistake, when Democrats do something Republicans don't think is right, is preface it with, just like Afghanistan, they did this, or they did that, or did that, because that Afghanistan issue really resonated with voters.
So, Monday morning, John Billings wakes up and says, man, that was an impressive panel. Chairman Emmer just called and wants to know whether we should think about doing a contract for America in this cycle. So I'm going to call everyone on the panel and ask them what they think. Chip, what do you tell John Billings?
I think keep the focus on them. I mean, if you do a contract for America again, I mean, you can do it on.
Call it what you want. It doesn't need to be. But
Yeah. I mean, it would be economics, it would be crime, it would be Afghanistan. But I think we don't want to give them something to shoot at when they're digging the hole. I think let them keep digging.
I'm going to skip John and go to Tori. Tori, John calls. What do you tell him?
I mean, I think at the local level, I mean, we've heard from other speakers, whether it was Governor Noem or Chairman McDaniel, that we have to be reaching out to other people, especially as we get into the general election. And a lot of those issues at the state level, people have seen two Michigans, right? We've seen a Michigan where there was a rule set for Governor Whitmer, and then there was a rule set for the rest of us. People's businesses were locked down. We have the worst recovery in the nation here, COVID, in Michigan. We have the absolute worst recovery in the Midwest because we've shut our businesses down and then we incentivize people not to work longer than any other state. And those, I think, are really Michigan-specific issues that if you go anywhere off this island on the way back to wherever you came from, there's going to be a help wanted sign or a please bear with us. We only had 2 people show up to work today sign. And then you have the school issue. And I think those are really Michigan-specific things that people are fired up about. And just not to take all the time, but you talked about recruiting candidates. At the Michigan Freedom Fund and Michigan Freedom Network, where I work, we're putting a lot of effort in right now to recruiting great candidates at the state house and state senate level who are non-traditional Republicans, who you might expect. And there's people out there, we all have to talk to them, right? If we meet somebody at our local school who seems engaging and they seem fired up, those are the kind of people that we all have to individually recruit to run for office, right? A lot of people don't think about that on their own.
I want to get to that in a second. Steve, go ahead. Answer. The question on the table is about what do you tell John?
I think that if you can get widespread support for that concept, it would be a good concept. Contract for America worked for Newt Gingrich in 1994. The Republicans took back Congress for the first time in 44 years. And if you can get buy-in from as many people as possible, then it's something worth doing. We have a real opportunity to elect a Republican governor this year. Everybody talks about the fact that no incumbent governor in Michigan has lost re-election since 1962. What they don't tell you is that in the last 4 times governors have run, they've run with the opposite party in the White House. We haven't seen a governor run with their own party in the White House since 1974. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has to run this time with a Democrat in the White House. And I did some research on this. What happens when governors run for re-election with their party in the White House? And I went back 6 decades, and out of the 166 incumbents running with their party in the White House, 27.5% lost. We have a 1 in 4 chance of taking the governorship in Michigan, and those are good odds. It's better odds than Congress. An average of 26 seats are lost in Congress, and if they figure they've got 250, 230 seats, that's only 1 out of 10. So this is a real opportunity this year because of the fact Joe Biden is in the White House.
Jason?
Woo!
You know, over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a fundamental realignment of the coalitions that define the two parties, and I think we need to lean into that. The Republican Party today, contrary to what we've been told most of our lives, is now the party of working people and small businesses and entrepreneurs. And the Democratic Party is the party of the elites and the bigs, big tech, big media, big corporations, big labor, big cities, big government. And their values are woke, elite, progressive nonsense that we're wrestling with as a country. And they don't reflect the majority of the country. And so I don't disagree with what Chip said, that we've got something to run against in what the Democrats are giving us. But one of the things the state party did in a statewide poll was test a blue-collar agenda, just the label of what that might look like as we go into the elections. And the polling on it was through the roof. I mean, within Democrats, it was a solid majority. With Republicans and independents, it was even larger. And I wondered when we did that poll if not everybody saw themselves as reflected in blue collar. But I think even white collar voters see that we need to deal with the middle class and working class in terms of what we're doing, because they're getting screwed in the current environment. And so I think that we got to lean into making sure people understand that we're the party of the working class and small businesses. And incidentally, when you look over the last 18 months in this COVID pandemic, who's benefited? Big tech, big media, big corporations, big labor, big cities, big government, and everybody else has a boot on their neck, and we've got to, I think, lean into that.
John?
The hard part is like what Steve said about whether you can get widespread support for it. In a post-Tea Party, post-MAGA sort of social media world, I think it would be very hard for the congressional side to unite the party and unite the grassroots behind a contract with America. I think it was much easier to do sort of that top-down kind of messaging at the congressional level back in those days than it is today. However, I think it might be a good idea for a nominee to do in the future. If a presidential nominee, once they were close to or winning the nomination, they may have the authority to implement it.
John Billings, I'll give you a chance to weigh in.
I got great advice coming all from every
I just
direction.
saved you a bunch of phone calls.
I do think we already have an agenda, and a lot of it, the agenda is a combination of what Chip said, but what the other panelists said. We are the party for lower taxes, and we're seeing the Democrats trying to raise our taxes. They're trying to defund the police. We're trying to ensure that our safety and security at home is there. We have proposals that were strong on the borders that Biden ended, and look what happened. The other thing I think is unique about congressional races, if you think about a congressional race, it's the largest local race on a ballot. Everything above a congressional race is statewide. So I say that because local issues matter, and that's one thing we always tell our candidates. Find the issue that matters most to your district. And Nicole Malliotakis from Staten Island is a member of Congress because of defund the police. Her district is filled with police officers, retired police officers, firefighters from New York City. Max Rose went and marched in a defund the police parade. We got pictures of it, every single ad, and now she's a member of Congress. So find those local issues.
Tori, you know, it's interesting. I think in the last maybe not even 2 years, the importance of local officials has taken on a whole new importance. State House legislatures have become the new cool thing. School board members pushing back against a woke agenda have become the cool thing. How much do you guys see that on the ground, that people are saying, I want to step up because my community's under attack, my kid's getting asked to read some crazy stuff in school?
I think this will be a record year for Republican, especially Republican women, running for office at local school boards, for State House, for State Senate. Luckily here in Michigan, we've had a State House and State Senate who's been able to push back as much as they could against Governor Whitmer, but that's really our last line of defense. We're seeing a lot of people step up to run for school board because of what they're learning in school, also because of the shutdowns, the mask mandates, things like that, and I think we're building a great base for now and into the future for the party that we're really excited about.
Chip, back in the 90s, when people were running for Congress, they would tout their experience. I was a state senator, I did this, I was on the student council, whatever. Now, we shifted, right, in the last couple of years. You wanted outsiders, you wanted people. Do you think we're shifting back because people want to say, oh, you were at the State House, you were on the school board, that experience is becoming cool again?
I don't think it is. I think people still want an outside. People are running for the school board because the school board, it's outrageous what's happening at a lot of those. So people are animated by the issues that are occurring. I think in terms of just globally how our candidates want to be positioned, I think you still want to be outsider and patriotic. I mean, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of excitement and energy around the military veterans who are running for office. But people believe that it's just so corrupt, the whole system, just any tie to honor and integrity. I mean, I think in American politics, 15 years ago, it was very much, what's the most important issue? People want to vote for someone that they agree with. I think today, people think everybody's just a liar, and so it's more, who can I trust? Maybe I'm not going to agree with them on the issues, but I believe they mean what they're saying.
Yeah.
John, you're at the NRCC. What is these candidates that are coming to you guys looking for support, they're stepping up, what's the background? Has there been any change?
What's the what? I'm sorry.
Like, in other words, when you guys get contacted by someone saying, I'm running for Congress, are you seeing a shift at all in terms of the background that they bring?
We are definitely seeing a more diverse. I think what we're stressing with individuals is not necessarily only your biography of what you've accomplished, what you've done, but what we're seeing with voters, they want to know your motivation. And I think to what Chip was just saying, they want to know why you're running. What has motivated you to put your name on the ballot, and what are you passionate about? And because they do want the trust. They want someone that's doing this for the right reasons and not because it's the next step in the level, whether they came from the State House and next thing you know, we're going to Congress, et cetera.
How much, go ahead.
As we talk about outsiders, insiders, I was doing a lot of polling all over the country in 1994 when it was supposedly the year of the outsider. And yet every time you would test somebody's resume, if they had strong credentials, the voters were supporting those strong credentials. It made them a little more likely to vote for those candidates. I think it's a matter of finding the right issues, and we've talked about these issues of inflation and law enforcement. I think this school issue is really going to try to impact the one group of voters where we're not doing well with, and the reason we lost the presidency arguably is because of suburban women. And they're concerned about law enforcement, and they're concerned about the education that their children are getting. The critical race theory, they're concerned about the far-left wokeness in their schools. And I think that we can use those issues very effectively to try to bring in that one group of voters that is hurting us most, which is suburban women.
How important is money these days? With social media, is it becoming less important? Is it still, back in the day, that's all reporters wanted to know. How much have you raised? When are you going on TV? John?
Well, the old adage is you need enough money to get your message out, but I think what's more interesting is sort of how the fundraising has changed. In a Bush 2000 world, your fundraising was based on bundlers, and you'd get 1,000 people at the presidential level to agree to raise 50 grand or 25 grand or whatever. But it's really changed. Now these campaigns are largely funded online. partially because the campaign contribution limits haven't gone up very rapidly, and partially because of obviously the social media and whatnot. But the way they're funded has really changed, and it's changed in a positive way because these folks are truly engaged in the campaign and want to be a part of it, and are essentially funding it through small donors these days.
How's fundraising going on the Republican side between the candidates and the committees?
It's something we're probably the most proud of right now, of where we're at. I think I agree with John completely. One of the things that has changed drastically is how Republicans raise money, and there was always this mindset that the Democrats would always dominate us on the digital front, and it's not because WinRed is a sponsor of this, but one of the things at the NRCC, up to this point in 2019, if you go back 2 years, we have raised $53 million. At the end of August, we were up to $93 million. We're outpacing the DCCC, where they were 20 million ahead of us in this time in 19. Our online grassroots donations is roughly 40 million of that. It's grown over 200%. And I think, thank you. And we're doing better than the Democrats. So for everyone that never thought Republicans could raise money online from small dollars, we're proving it. And our freshmen, I mean, I'm looking at Congresswoman Mace in the front row. She's one of our best online fundraisers. Young Kim is one of our best online fundraisers. Michelle Steele. I mean, the paradigm of how people raise money in the Republican Party has changed.
Do you ever worry about, we used to call them at the RNC scam packs? There are people out there who are, hitch their wagon onto, you give us money. How much does that take away from the mission?
It takes away from the mission, and we're trying to educate our candidates more. What we did at the NRCC, as we were saying, you need to focus on digital fundraising. We doubled the size of our digital department, where now every candidate is assigned an individual to focus solely on their digital fundraising to help with that education. I think the more of our world is educated about online fundraising, what is good practices, what are bad practices, we're going to be able to get rid of some of that.
But you've got good groups out there, like Michigan Freedom Fund, Tory. How much do you guys try to play in defining these roles? Because you've got the campaign, the parties, but then you got these outside groups, who can be extremely helpful or hurtful. I mean, depending on if they're supporting your candidate or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Michigan, we first saw with John James, he really started the small dollar online massive fundraising here, and I think a lot of candidates have done well after that. But I think the greatest thing about online small dollar fundraising is that it helps people who don't traditionally have a path to run for office. And they can be well funded and they can compete. And as we're talking about recruiting, I think that's a big thing to talk about. There has to be groups out there that help people grow their lists, whether it's a committee at the national level. I think we're starting to see that a little bit at the state level. We want to help with that, right? If I'm running for state house as a Democrat, I can fundraise off of Emily's list to grow my list. We do need groups like ours to step up, to invest, to help people who could run for state house or Congress for the first time raise money the first time they run so they don't have to build a list.
Chip, you're a pollster, right?
Yes.
So I'm sitting out in the audience. I've heard over and over again, the polls were wrong in 2016, the polls were wrong in 2020. How much faith should people have in the integrity of the polls? And what's the difference between what we read in the paper, the public polls, and the ones that you do privately for campaigns?
I think there are going to be big differences, and I think a lot of the reason why pollsters get into trouble is there's a lot of sort of presets that people do on methodology and demos and things like that. Sometimes bias intentional, but a lot of it's unintentional bias, just people trying to be predictive. But I think that polling is still accurate, and I think that there's going to be a lot of attempts to make corrections based on why the public polls get their polls wrong in 2020. But the last war was the last war, the next war is the next war, this war is this war. What's going to be the dynamic in next year's polling and its accuracy might be look very different than it did before. So I would caution sort of overreaction. I think that there was, I can remember last cycle specifically, I was doing polling on about a third of the House races in the country between NRCC, Congressional Leadership Fund, and some of my own specific candidates. And I remember getting those last polls back, and we have all these races that were tied races, margin of error. And we said, there's going to be, what tends to happen when you have a lot of races that are tied is there tends to be a late break in one direction. A lot of people guessed it'd be a bad break. Well, it ended up being a good break. Nobody knew, but the break was there. We win those races, and I think you're going to see that again. So I think polling remains very important.
John and then Tori.
And it's not that polling in general has been wrong, it's that media polling has been wrong. So the numbers that we see behind the scenes are largely accurate. The poll we released in 2016 had Trump tied in Michigan in the final days, and it was essentially tied in Michigan in the final days. And so most of the polling that we see, there is some breaking that Chip talks about, but generally speaking, the behind-the-scenes polling that most strategists are using is pretty accurate.
Tori.
Just talking about when the polls break and the timing, one thing we haven't talked about yet is how voting is changing and how we used to say we have to peak by a certain time, right? And now we're seeing votes, come in as early as 1 to 2 months before the election. So I think as people are watching this, if you're running for state house or senate or Congress, your message arc has to be done a lot earlier than it used to be, and that means you need to be raising money earlier. You need to be polling on issues earlier. Because as we get into October, most of the electorate has already voted. We saw last year in Michigan.
Jason, then John.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with polling in the public space is that it's misinterpreted and overinterpreted. First of all, I wish the media would just stop conducting polls and reporting on polls, because no one cares what the media's projection of what our opinions are. But polling is a vehicle for campaigns to test messages and figure out how to win elections. And when a media entity publishes a poll, they're trying to be predictive of what's going to happen in an election. Well, in order to get that outcome, the variables set up in that poll have to occur to get to that number. And so, you see this poll, a week out from the election, it said that this would be the outcome, but this was the outcome. What happened? Where was the breakdown? Well, some of those variables didn't occur. You can't control what your opponent's going to do. You can't control events that might happen outside of a campaign. So I think people should be thinking about polls and using polls within the campaign as a tool to winning an election, not to gauge public opinion and then try to influence how people feel about things based on who may win or lose.
John?
I would say some of the challenges we had with polling in the last cycle was not necessarily what the poll was telling us, but the groupthink of what we were convinced. And I mean, we went into election day being told we'd lose 15 to 20 seats in the House, and we ended up gaining 15 seats. And I'll be honest, we were doubting ourselves because we couldn't figure out the numbers. Chip was right. There was a lot of polling we were doing that showed us winning races that we're being told not even a chance. So we were either right, which it turned out we were, or we were completely wrong. But because of the mindset, it was more looking into, well, were we wrong? And that's to a degree where the media was. Media convinced so many people the Republicans had no chance. And so as we were seeing the numbers, we were almost doubting them because of what the groupthink was.
Steve?
What I kept seeing in my polling, and I did a lot of polling here in Michigan in legislative races, is this concept of the shy Trump voter. We kept getting these samples that were coming back way Democratic. And you begin to think, geez, are the Republicans voting or not? And because of that, I would weigh a poll a little more Democratic than I thought I should. And as it turned out, the turnout was consistent with other years, but I just discovered that, from my polling at least, that the Trump voters were not responding at the same level as Democrats were responding to the polls. And it sort of, you have to look at it and begin to look at the samples and wonder what's going on. Well, what was going on is that the Trump voters weren't responding.
John Yob, speaking of the Trump voters, what role should Donald Trump play in the midterms?
Well, that's a tough one. His endorsement is very, very important in the party. My hope is that he endorses candidates that can actually win the general election. My preference would be that he lets his voice be heard and endorses candidates, but ideally candidates that both support him and support his agenda, but also can get through a general election.
Chip, let me give you my analysis. I think there's 3 buckets that the Trump endorsement works. If there's a one-on-one, I'm in a primary, I'm the pro-Trump person and you're the anti-Trump person. The pro-Trump person wins a one-on-one primary every day of the week. The second bucket is when everybody is pro-Trump and he endorses someone. I'm thinking Missouri Senate, Ohio Senate, where basically every one of the candidates supports him, but he throws his lot with somebody that, gives them an edge, but I wouldn't be surprised if another person wins, right? North Carolina primary, potentially. But then I think there's a third, which I would put the Liz Cheney race in Wyoming, which is clearly there's an anti-Trump, and he's endorsed someone, Hagedorn, but then there's a potential, because there's like 84 other people running, that Cheney could win with a plurality, which doesn't mean that his endorsement didn't happen, but it's not that one-on-one race. Do you think that that's an accurate analysis of what his endorsement means?
Yes.
You can disagree.
No, I think it's well put. I think any candidate that wants to win, I mean, it has to be aligned with Trump, and I think it's good that he's playing an active part in the process. And I think President Trump's they've gotten a lot more sort of sophisticated in terms of how they're navigating these primaries, and I think it was a little more ad hoc, and I think there's a little more method to it now, which I think is good, because he doesn't want to get in a situation where he endorses a weaker person, or that does worse, and also doesn't need to unnecessarily kind of engage if there's a lot of people who are aligned with him. So I think there's more method to it now, and I think that's good.
Steve, let me go with this. How does a candidate in more of a swing district say, okay, I'm glad to have his support, but I can't win as the Trump candidate in this X swing district?
I disagree. As I look at it, there were 2 state Senate special elections in Michigan, and I did polling in both those elections. And I asked the question, are you more or less likely to vote for a candidate that supports Donald Trump? And in both races, 62% were much more likely to vote for a candidate who supports Donald Trump, and another 20% were a little more likely. In other words, 80% of the base wants a candidate that supports Donald Trump. I think a candidate puts himself or herself in peril if they try to run away from the president. That's always been the case. It certainly is the case with Donald Trump. I think he had sufficient support in this state, in many districts, that if you run away from him, you're jeopardizing getting the base, and you need the base to win. And so I would argue, and I would recommend to my candidates, stick with the president, and you're going to do okay. There's a lot of people that disagree with that concept, but I just see President Trump as being such a powerful figure still over Republican politics that don't run away from him. Now, you may not want to bring him in to campaign for you if you're in a tight district, but don't run away from him.
John, you agree? I mean, you got all these folks now coming at you in various districts.
Yep. I mean, President Trump, and especially President Trump policies, remain extremely popular in our party, and I especially look at his policies, whether you're in a swing district or down in Texas or somewhere else. I mean, just the border alone, that crosses every single thing. At the NRCC, we have one goal, and that's majority. It's how to put a math equation together to get to that 218 number, and the president's part of that. The reality is we invited him. He's going to headline our largest fundraiser down in Tampa in November, and we look forward to it.
Tori, you said something that I want to touch on. The early vote has become more and more important, and I think for a while Republicans were fearful of embracing it. They didn't want to talk about mail-in votes. In fact, the president, talked about the concerns. It's almost, and I think he rightly so. There's a big difference between absentee voting and sending a ballot to everybody, right? Which is ridiculous. But how do campaigns or organizations adapt to that early vote? Because you touched on it, getting that message out earlier. But in some states where we don't control the process, you may not like it, but it's here to stay.
So Jocelyn Benson, we think, and I think most people say here, really tilt the election when she sent ballots to every single person. And to be frank, she didn't send ballots to everybody. She sent ballots to everybody who lives here now, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people who live in Texas, right? And I think a lot of people had problems with that. And I think that created a lot of the problem. However, over 50% of the electorate voted absentee, right? So in Michigan, it's not really early voting, they call it absentee, but So we really have to acknowledge that that's probably how people are going to continue to vote, especially Republicans. Pre-COVID, it was at about 30%. In Michigan voted absentee, now we're over 50%. So I think we have to understand that we have to get our message out earlier, and we have to have aggressive absentee chase programs to the permanent absentee voters now and to people who are getting ballots. And I think there's a good place for candidates to do that and for outside groups to help with that.
John?
It has a big impact on campaigns because you have to start spending money so much earlier. So whether it's TV ads, it used to be you won the election with 40% deciding the last 2 weeks. Now people decide much earlier and they vote much earlier. So it's really stretched out when you spend your TV. Ambassador Weiser made a very good decision here in Michigan, in the state party to the state committee, in terms of moving the conventions earlier. Now we're having an endorsement convention in April rather than in August. If we stuck in August, then literally people would almost already be voting just as we got our nominee and wouldn't have the time for Secretary of State and Attorney General to even get TV ads in the air.
You know, it's funny, one of my biggest pet peeves is this ridiculous media narrative that Republicans are trying to restrict people from voting. There isn't a state in this country that doesn't have absentee voting, number one. Number two, in the same way that a lot of people were allowed to go work remotely during a pandemic, some states eased up in how they could let. And now somehow if you don't maintain all of the various ways to vote, you're seen as trying to restrict the right to vote. Jason, how do you message that?
Well, I do think we have to be blunt and unscared of fighting this fight. We should not be shrinking because they're calling us racist because we're pushing these reforms. But you're right, there were secretaries of state in key states around the country that took advantage of the COVID pandemic to do extra legal changes in how we vote, and now treating it as if that's the standard. Even though that was not statutorily put in place, by fiat, they did these things, like sending the absentee ballots to everybody. And then, because we want to go back to the 2018 standard, which is codified in law, somehow all of a sudden we're rolling back people's ability to vote. I think we've got to lean on, I think we've got to, and another thing too, I think we have as a party been shrinking from taking these fights to mainstream media airwaves. We are ceding the ground with where centrist and center-left voters are, that we could be pulling back into understanding where we're coming from because we're staying in our lanes of just listening to Fox, OAN, Newsmax, et cetera.
Well,
and that's our base. Not that we shouldn't listen to Newsmax all the time.
I don't care if you listen to it,
We've got to
turn it on, I need the ratings.
We've got to reach beyond our silos to make these arguments so that we can win the support that we need to make those reforms.
John, are you guys adjusting how you address that with candidates to make sure that they're ready to get those, go after the mail-in vote population? And frankly, do you think that because of the messaging, we saw this, at least there was a narrative that after the Georgia primary, after the Georgia Senate races, that people were afraid to vote by mail. They didn't feel that their vote would count. So where's that balance between trying to say, hey, this is the game, we got to play it?
I think a combination of what was just said, John is completely right. You got to work with the campaign so that they understand their laws, of that they're spending their money at the time. People are making decisions and you're getting enough of the message in front of them. But at some point, the rules are going to be the rules, and we shouldn't allow the Democrats to take advantage of what rules are out there. And sometimes we got to play by their rules as we're trying to get better things on the books. And a perfect example, we won a special election in California last year in LA, Mike Garcia, and one of the things we did was start copying how they were collecting ballots. We had ballot boxes at churches, at Republican type areas, and part of it was an education process during that to ensure those voters understood that this was a secure way to vote, that they can trust the process because we were part of the process, and that their vote would count. And we had a Republican win in the Los Angeles district. That hasn't happened in a while.
Steve?
I just got to jump real quick because we did Congressman Garcia's race. And I think it was a great blueprint, actually, for how Republicans can win in these areas. And for when they mail out those ballots, there are a lot of Republicans who don't vote, and that they helped get a lot of our people out, too. So it did cut both ways when they sent those ballots out, and it helped us in some places.
Steve?
I think sometimes Republicans get too defensive. We know that 75% of all voters believe that there should be a photo ID in order to vote. I think we have to go on the offensive rather than the defensive and say, I support these laws. I support them because there's nothing more important than a secure election. And if you have to have a photo ID to do almost everything, why shouldn't you have to do it to do the most important thing we do in a democracy, vote? And if you go on the offensive, you put the other side on the defensive. And I think that's one of the major mistakes Republicans make.
I want to pick up on that because I think from a pro-life standpoint, from a voting standpoint, and I could probably think of 10 other examples, I think you're spot on. We need to fight more. We should be proud to stand up for life. We should be proud to stand up for the Constitution. And I think Republicans too often sit back and go, oh, I don't want to have that discussion. But I think the thing is that's fascinating is we're right because everything makes sense. You can't have an argument with everyone that says, you need an ID to do all these things, but the one thing that you value the most, let's just wing it. I think the other thing is when it comes to voting, look, I put my money in a bank not because my house has been broken into 18 times, but because I value it and I want it protected. We need to talk about how we cherish and value our vote, and it's not that it's been stolen every time, but we want to protect the value of it. I think we as Republicans have got to start getting out there and be willing to fight for the principles that make us better. John?
I totally agree, and the interesting part on sort of the voter fraud and that kind of thing is there actually has been instances in Wayne County of people getting in trouble, clerks getting in trouble for not handling things correctly. And one of them passed. This was 6, 8, 10 years ago. One of them passed, and so I don't want to dig too far into that. But and then a Southfield one went to jail or got in trouble for it. So these kinds of things have happened historically. People have gotten in trouble for it. So it's not too much to ask for it to be a secure process.
Tori, do we need to be more positive and optimistic, or just more logical, or both?
I think logical is a good one. I think willing to push back and speak out, right? And that's what's really exciting for me, is I see a lot of people who haven't been in politics a long time, who are really engaging in the process now. They want to have discussions because they've seen these Democrat overreach, right? I cannot stress enough how extreme our lockdowns were in Michigan. They were the longest, we had the most things locked down, and it really impacted people's lives. And I think a lot of people, we saw it with the rallies, they were willing to step up and say, hey, no more lockdowns. We got a huge ballot initiative passed in Michigan last year to end the governor's restrictions, right? And now they're doing another one to end the health orders. There are people, we are ready to fight. I mean, people here are ready to fight. We're willing to speak out against Gretchen Whitmer, against Dana Nessel, against Jocelyn Benson. And I think that's why we're going to be fired up in 2022. We definitely have the momentum, and I totally think everybody here is ready to fight.
So you guys, we've got 6 top political operatives that have been through a lot of campaigns. We got a lot of people out there that run or will run a campaign. What's one earned media tactic, some might call it a stunt, that you've pulled off that you would say that really was a cool thing, a game changer in the campaign, whether it's for a candidate or towards maybe an issue where you thought, hey, we handed out potholders at whatever it is. Is there something that you've done in your career that you thought, man, this was actually, it's the war story that you always tell? Chip, I'll start with you.
You should give us a heads up on that one.
It's always good when you show up with a pig and say you're cutting the pork.
John?
We've had some pretty good ones over the past couple of, if not weeks, at the NRCC. We sent the 9 Democrats that signed a letter to Pelosi saying they will not do anything, but they would not allow a reconciliation bill to begin until they considered the transportation bill. They folded like that. We sent all 9 of them doormats and been running digital ads in their districts saying, what's the difference between Sidney Axne and a doormat? Absolutely nothing. Nancy Pelosi will step all over you. So we're constantly trying to find little things the media will pick up on.
Tori?
From 1 to 2:30 today, we have a Rules for Thee, but not for me party at the Yankee Rebel. We have a land shark, because that's where Gretchen Whitmer drank with her friends, why it was illegal for the rest of us. I hear Gretchen Whitmer's boat is going to be there, and her private jet is going to make an appearance, so we'll be happy for that. And then also, I think everybody has their hush money, right? Does anybody have their hush money to get to the party? You got some. I see it. All right.
early in my career, I was doing a mayoral race in the city of Warren, and I was working for the mayor, and we were faced with a headline that said, "Red ooze dumped in Warren. Leachate from the city of Detroit was being dumped into the Warren water system." And my guy was going to be toast. I remembered years ago touring a water facility, and a guy actually drank it. So I said, "Well, Mayor, we're going to have to drink the sewer water to show that it's safe." We held a press conference. All the major TV stations in Detroit showed up. Warren's a suburb of Detroit. The mayor had already tested. He said he'd get sick, but he wouldn't die. He wanted to keep his job. Getting sick was okay. So that visual headlined the news on 3 of the 4 stations in Detroit. The issue went away, and he won re-election. So,
Awesome. Jason?
Well, my list is so long, it's hard to pick a favorite. Now, actually, in 2006, I was running Peter Roskam's campaign in the Chicago suburbs against Tammy Duckworth, who was Rahm Emanuel's handpicked candidate. And the Monday before the election, Barack Obama, who was wildly popular at that point, particularly in Illinois, was coming in to do a big rally for Duckworth in the closing hours. And so we wanted to bracket it. And we actually leaned in on her wanting to raise the retirement age for Social Security benefits based on how she answered the AARP questionnaire. So we got a bunch of 64-year-olds about 2 hours before the rally and put them in front of a retirement home, and each of them stepped up to the camera and said, you know, "I'm so-and-so, I'm 64, I was planning to retire next year, but if Tammy Duckworth gets elected and raises the retirement age, I'll have to work for 3 more years." So when they went to the rally to get Duckworth on camera about Obama coming in, they kept asking her about these wanting to cut Social Security benefits and raise the retirement age, and we stepped all over the messaging of the Obama rally.
All right, John Yob. Give us something good.
I've never done an earned media stunt before.
That's
I think anyone who saw the announcement last week knows that's not true. But the nerd ad, obviously, that we did with Governor Snyder was some degree a earned media stunt. Obviously, we had a lot of success with Chief Craig last week with the announcement and our friendly protesters who showed up for us. And then maybe yet today we'll go issue a move-out notice up at Governor Whitmer's mansion.
okay. So, let's do a little bit of a quick lightning round. I'm just going to go straight down. I'll start with the easy. Do Republicans take back the House? But I'm going to add a wrinkle in this. Buy more than 10 seats.
Oh, yes. I think we're entering a Republican renaissance. I think we're going to take the House, we're going to take the Senate.
Don't get ahead of the questions.
Oops, sorry. Yes. And more than 10.
John?
I have to say yes.
Yeah. Tori?
Yes, and we are going to defeat Alyssa Slotkin and Haley Stevens in Michigan.
Steve?
Looking at 6 races, 6 election years, when the president's popularity, job approval is around 45%, the average loss of the party in the White House is 50 seats. We won't win that many, but we'll take control by we'll pick up at least 20, 25.
Jason?
I think every variable out there that we can't control is going our direction, and if we stay out of our own way, we're going to have an historic year.
Yep.
John Yob?
I think it's going to be a historic year on par with 1994, 2010. I think it's going to be a fantastic year for Republicans.
So just so you understand the senators, these are yes or no questions. We have a minute to get through the rest. Do we take back the Senate, Chip?
Yes.
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 Yep.
See.
Probably.
Okay. Does Donald Trump run in 2024? Does Donald Trump, he's the former president, does he run in 2024?
I think so.
I do.
Probably.
Yes, even if he's indicted. Which I expect him to be in the Southern District of New York.
Yes.
I think so.
Okay. Does anyone else run prominent if he runs?
No.
Yes.
Maybe. Diversity.
Diversity.
Steve?
Not unless they want a kamikaze mission.
Ooh. Jason?
I'll second Tori.
I think someone probably does.
Okay. All right, last thing. Give me one thing that on election day or election night we're surprised this November when or in 2022 that we see. So one thing that's going to surprise us. We take something back, someone that you didn't think was going to win. Or vice versa, someone loses that we didn't think.
Well, I think we'll take the Senate more comfortably than people think. I mean, I think we will hold all of our open seats, and I think we'll win most of those sort of competitive pickup opportunities.
John?
We'll go from 0 to multiple House seats in New England.
Okay.
I don't think this will surprise people here, but maybe the media. I think we will sweep Michigan governor, attorney general, and secretary of state.
I've done a couple polls on Governor Whitmer in the last 2 months. Both of them show her leading by only 2%. She's at 46 to 44. She's running about 8 or 9% behind her job approval. I truly believe that Governor Whitmer is going to lose.
Okay. Jason?
Sean Spicer's show is still on Newsmax. I just don't even have one for you.
Okay.
The one thing we didn't talk about was redistricting, and I think that redistricting will backfire on the Democrats for trying to manipulate the process.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say, Michigan, I think we're going to do really well on the redistricting maps. I think we're going to net seats at the House, Senate, and Congress.
I will end by just putting a plug in for my state. I think Virginia is something to keep an eye on election night. I feel very good about how bad Biden is doing. Thank you all very much.
Good job. Thank you.